All right, I'm picking up where I left off in the previous lecture video, and we're picking up at slide number 77. And now we're going to look away from different libraries and stuff, and look at reinforcement learning from human feedback. So in other words, where human beings get involved to enhance the performance of large language models. Moving on to the next slide here. So one of the considerations that we do have is these ethical concerns. So they're saying here that large language models such as GPT-3 are powerful. They have billions of parameters. We've talked about this stuff before. It outperforms its predecessor on a bunch of different benchmarks without fine-tuning it, because it is so advanced. And they indicate here that the authors address broader societal impacts, including fairness, bias, and representation. And there are biases even in the GPT-3, where we might have like racial biases or gender biases or religious biases. And part of that is because of the data that the model's trained on. So as it says, it's derived from the training data, and it's highlighting the garbage in, garbage out problem, right? So like if we're training it on public facing internet information, well, a lot of us know that some of the stuff that ends up on the internet isn't of quality. I mentioned earlier in the previous lecture video that it's strange how many of the big large language models have trained on top of Wikipedia, for example. And even in Wikipedia, even though it's gotten much, much better, there's still the ability for people to kind of put in whatever content they want, whether it's real or not, right? And it eventually gets tweaked, but if the model trains on that data, then that bias or flaw is built into it. Biases in LLMs, it says here, originate from the training data they are exposed to. And I think that's what I just said, basically, right? And it says it's crucial to see these biases as we're kind of training them to make sure that, it's not happening. Right. So how do you fix that? Well, you start to diversify the data to get more perspectives into the mix, right? So like we wouldn't train it, let's say, on information from just one country on the planet or one demographic or societal group. We would try to get information from all the different countries and all the different groups and all the different aspects of society. We can also put in bias checking mechanisms as we're training. And then we have to keep researching and testing basically to make sure that what it's outputting is not that. Ironically, I went to a training thing that we did for school where we had a speaker speak about AI, and the speaker asked the AI to generate an image of a certain type of person, and it was gender, racial, and societally biased in its output. It was really kind of interesting how that worked, without getting into the specifics of what it showed. But it was kind of shocking, actually. I mean, it was a cool image, right? But it clearly indicated that there's some sort of bias in those models for sure. Right. One way we can address this is by getting humans into the mix during the fine-tuning phase to go, no, that's not right, or that's not good, or that's really bad, right? Kind of like having your mom look over your shoulder when you're talking to somebody and correcting how you're speaking. So that might be an approach that we can use to kind of fix things. It does talk here that when reinforcement learning with human feedback has a 3-step training process. The LLMs are fine-tuned with human supervision, creating what we call a supervised fine-tuned model, or an SFT. Those FFTs are used to initialize reward models with a linear head trained with a preference data set. So in other words, we would give it a set of data in the areas where it's struggling that's pre-configured to feed to it, so it's not training on data that is biased. So we're controlling what input is going in to reinforce that. We take that further. We add a little bit of reinforcement learning to it, and we use that reinforcement model then basically as the reward function. And it's the goal, as it indicates at the bottom, is to try to align it with proper human principles, principles of fairness and justice, etc. And it says here, reducing toxicity, improving truthfulness, and minimizing bias. And those are good goals to have for sure. This technique, as it says here, for mitigating issues in LLMs, is we have to have, if we're going to try to eliminate, for example, toxic language, we have to be able to measure it, right? We also have to be able to measure when an AI is hallucinating or whether it's giving us information that's not exactly correct, right? So we have to be able to look at it and consider it. I don't know if you guys ever do this when you're working with a generative AI, and maybe you do, maybe you don't, is I'm always of the mindset to be polite and asking what I want from it. And then sometimes I even respond with a thank you, most of them, like ChatGPT for sure has a little thumbs up, thumbs down, or it asks like, was this a good answer? And then it'll do a follow-up and say, why wasn't it good? What was bad about it? So I can figure out like what part of it is wrong, right? And the more advanced models can then incorporate that data dynamically into future responses. If we can get lower scores for toxicity and hallucination, then we have better models, and we would hope that they're truthful. But the truthfulness is really kind of based upon what they know, and if they don't know good information, it's not that they're trying to be untruthful, but that's just what they know. Right. So they can only repeat what they've been taught. Right. And interesting how that parallels humans, right? Like humans will do the same thing. If they're taught a bunch of not good things or they're just taught one mindset, humans will also just repeat what they've been taught, or maybe what they hear on TV or the radio or whatever. So when we do the reinforced learning with human feedback, it does improve the baseline scores of the GPT models. Not perfectly though, right? But it does improve them. Whatever we do to them to adjust them, right? It does get influenced. Basically what they're indicating here is by the preferences of the people doing the labeling and their instructions and the context in which they receive the instruction. So like if I was an AI engineer building a large language model and I was told to eliminate all gender bias in there, right? It would be influenced by my approach to dealing with that problem, right? Like the human aspect comes into it as well. There is a tool called Instruct GPT that generates toxic and biased output on purpose. And this is kind of interesting because that is used basically to train the models into what not to do. So we use AI to train AI not to do bad things by showing it what bad things are, which is pretty strange, right? And teaching it what inappropriate content and why it's inappropriate. And they're indicating here that the essential goal is to align these language models with human principles, making them less toxic, more truthful, and less biased. But then you got to think about how human beings are. There are some people who are just unfortunately toxic, untruthful, and biased, right? And that's so if we're trying to mimic our own intelligence, maybe that's not such a great thing. Maybe we can create an idealistic set of standards that we can adhere to, right? And that we could all strive for, AIs and humans, basically. Now, they're continue on with this kind of thought here. It says that while this approach shows marked improvements over the baseline model, it is not perfect. Right. And this is the same slide I just looked at, isn't it? Right. It is the same slide. Okay. All right. So I apologize for that. There's a duplicate slide in there. I should probably just delete it now, but let's just skip over it. All right. So that you can read the text on the screen here. It says, while this, reinforcement learning through human feedback shows promise, it's important to understand how they actually work in order to fully appreciate the impact of that human feedback. They have a case study here that they're going to point us to now, where they're talking about reinforcement learning with human feedback, exploring the various techniques and implication for improving LLMs. So there is a link here. And what I'd like you to do once again is follow through on this article, and I'm just going to click on it, make sure it's working. I did get it to load earlier. Okay, so it is there. So I'd like you to read on this. This is from 2022, by the way. So I'd like you to read through that and look at the information here and how it's done, basically. And then we can have discussions basically about what some of the key points and insights were from this. And I think that they're pretty interesting. This comes from the Hugging Face environment, where they have a blog, and I think the information is really solid and helpful, by the way. I think this is the same. Is this the same link? We have the same problem again. I'm not sure if that's the same link. They do want, like if we were doing like a 4-hour session here, they'd like us to get into groups and discuss this. And I think this is something that you can kind of do within yourself if you wish. But you could, depending on how class time works out, we might be able to have some time to do this, but that would require people pre-reading this before we get there. All right. I have a couple of reflection questions here. You can answer those for yourself. And then I will put the bibliography up on the screen to show where all the sources came from. And that is a wrap on this lecture video. So it's a 2-parter this time. And I will try to have it posted, hopefully before class starts. We'll see. All right, folks, this video ends here.